Okay, so 5 affair recovery mistakes to avoid. Okay, so let's go ahead and kick off the actual content for this masterclass today. So we're going to start with how common is cheating? So a 2021 study by Health Testing Centers, they polled almost 500 couples, 500 people, and what they found was a little over 46% of the respondents said they had affairs. So that's roughly 50%. And so it varies based on which studies you read and what statistics you see, but it's relatively common, unfortunately, that couples experience infidelity at some point over the course of their relationship together. And according to this study, it's around 50%. And nearly half of those 50% impacted by infidelity stayed together. So they made it through. Half did not, half did. And so that's interesting to see that. So about 50% of couples who had infidelity were able to stay together and make it through. The other half did not. And this is one thing I say sometimes, you may have heard me say this, that the road to recovery for infidelity is very narrow, but there is a road. But a lot of couples don't know what that road is, and they make mistakes. And that's what we're going to talk about today. But there is a road for couples who choose to work through infidelity. There is a path. And that's why, this study even supports it. Half of the couples did report staying together even after infidelity. So the internet and dating sites have increased affairs significantly. And as you may or may not know, there's dating sites for people who want to have affairs. And so, all this explosion of dating sites and dating apps and everything at your fingertips, it's just increased the likelihood of affairs because you have options like you never had before. So before the internet and all these dating sites, you were very limited with who you can meet and where you can meet them. But now you have people from all over the world at your fingertips on an app on your phone, or from all over the city or all over your state right there on that website. And so unfortunately, that has increased the frequency of infidelity. And this study is taken from Psych Central. This is the URL. And by the way, everyone's going to get a copy of this. So when I'm done with this, I'm going to send out a recorded copy so you can rewatch this program. Okay, so let's get into defining some terms. So we're going to talk about 3 types of affairs. It's important to know, how are we defining an affair? What kind of affairs are there? I'm going to talk about 3 main types of affairs. The first one is a physical affair. So this is where there's sexual contact, but the couple's not in love. So this would be your typical one-night stand. So I saw a couple one time, they were in my office for infidelity, and the male, the guy, the husband, he had an affair, and it was a one-night stand. He was on a work trip, he was at a bar, had too much to drink, met a woman, they ended up having an affair that night. And so, but there was no strings attached, like no emotional feelings, no connection beyond their sexual connection that night. And so this happens. So this is an example of one of the types of affairs that happen frequently. It's more the one-night stand type of affair. And actually, these type of affairs are the easiest to break and the easiest to overcome, the easiest to heal from, even though obviously all affairs are devastating. All affairs are traumatic. All affairs create PTSD for the betrayed partner. But this kind of affair, because there's no emotional attachment, there's no connection, it's much easier to cut that person out of your life and have no more contact with them. And so from that perspective, this type of affair is the easiest of the 3 types to overcome. The second type of affair is an emotional affair. This is where the couple is actually in love or falling in love, but there's no sexual contact. But usually with an emotional affair, it's just a matter of time before there is sexual contact. So this does happen, and you may have experienced this yourself, or your partner has, where they started getting to know someone at work or at the gym or a neighbor, and one thing led to another, and they just slowly start developing feelings for each other because boundaries were crossed. And we're going to get into what puts us at risk for an affair, but no sexual contact happened. And this might be because one of them stopped the relationship, or maybe it got discovered. Now, emotional affairs are harder to overcome because feelings have been developed. So whenever feelings have been developed and in love, feelings have started to cultivate, that makes it harder to break off contact with that person and overcome that affair. It still can happen, but it's harder. And then the third type is the combo affair. So this is where you have sexual contact and you have in-love feelings. So this is the hardest of all three types of affairs to overcome because you have both things happening. You have that sexual contact and you have feelings for that person. And again, you still can overcome this. People do every day, but it's the hardest of the three to overcome. And it's the hardest to heal because of these factors right there. Okay, so again, if you have questions as we go through this, just write your questions down, and we're going to have about 15 minutes for Q&A at the end. Okay, so now we're going to get into what are the top 10 things that increase someone's affair risk. Now, these things don't mean you're going to have an affair. It just means it might increase your risk to have an affair. And there's more than these 10, but these are a common 10. And some of these 10 things maybe you've thought of already, maybe you've experienced, some of them might be new. And so I think it's always helpful to be informed. A lot of people are not informed, and therefore they put themselves in risky situations, never thinking they would fall into an affair, and then it happens to them. And it wouldn't have happened if they wouldn't have put themselves in that risky situation. So becoming informed on these 10 things is helpful, because it shows you how many risks are you taking, or how many of these risk factors do you have, so that you can make some adjustments moving forward to lower your affair risk. So this first one, not forthcoming in general, this is more of a temperament issue. And so this refers to the person who tends to not share everything in general. Maybe they've had a history of dishonesty in the past, maybe they haven't, but they do have a temperament, a tendency to not be forthcoming in general. You have to kind of pull information out of them, and they tend to leave out parts of a story or parts of what really happened or parts of some facts. They tend to leave out things in general. Maybe they're just introverted, or maybe there has been some deceitful things in their past that they have intentionally left things out. But the more someone has this temperament to not really be a forthcoming in their communication style, the more likely they're not going to be forthcoming when they start doing something like an affair or start having feelings for someone. So this is a risk factor. So if this is a temperament that you have where you tend to be not very forthcoming, you're not very open, you're not very communicative, then that is a risk factor, because then if something does start happening, you're less likely to be open about that as well, or to share what's happening and how you're feeling. So that's one thing to consider, one risk factor. Another risk factor that's also a temperament related issue is a need for adoration. Some people have this deep-seated need to feel like the center, like they're special, like someone really wants them, someone really loves them, someone really adores them. And this often stems from their upbringing. Maybe growing up, they were the center and they were used to getting a lot of attention. And so having an affair is a way for them to get a lot of attention and feel adored again. Or maybe the opposite. Maybe growing up, they never got attention. They were always overlooked. And so for them, they really need that adoration because it's what they never received growing up. So again, these first two are more temperament issues. And so if you have either of these temperament tendencies, you just have to realize that this may increase your affair risk, and that might be something you need some support around to help you work on it. A third risk factor that can increase risk is chronic life stress. So this refers to life stress that's ongoing. Like you're in a really just stressful phase of life. Things are chaotic. You feel pulled in multiple directions. You don't feel a sense of mastery. Everything feels just out of control. And you're running from one thing to the next, and you're just constantly behind. Life stress. And what research shows is the higher our stress levels, the lower our impulse control, because it requires impulse control to resist things that we know we shouldn't do, things that we know are wrong. That takes impulse control to hold back. But when stress goes up, our ability to resist things and to hold off and to go against our impulses, that ability of impulse control is compromised when we're stressed. And so that's why if you have chronic life stress, it's going to be compromising your impulse control, which may put you at higher risk of moving forward with an affair that otherwise you would not do. A third thing that can increase affair risk is a traumatic event. So this is more of acute stress. So this might mean losing a parent you're really close to, or a big move that was really chaotic, or a big job change that was really difficult, or getting diagnosed with some type of health problem, something that's traumatic for you. And that's different per person on what's traumatic for them. But this can also increase affair risk, because when people go through something traumatic, they often lose their way. They lose their path. Everything is disoriented and they feel just lost in a tornado. And therefore, they sometimes will make choices and decisions in the midst of that they normally wouldn't make. So an affair is an example of that. The fifth reason, and this is probably a top one you hear about a lot, is needs not being met. And so when needs aren't being met in a marriage, it can increase your risk of feeling tempted to act out with an affair. Doesn't mean it's right, and we're going to talk about that later. Doesn't mean you're justified. But it does mean you may feel more desire to act out or to start an affair the more your needs are not met in your marriage. And needs, common needs, might be emotional intimacy. That's one. You know, I worked with another couple one time, and they were there because the woman had an affair. And in that situation, her needs for emotional intimacy were not being met with her husband. And she really wanted to cultivate that emotional closeness, but he was not reciprocating. He was not tending to that need for her. And then she started talking to her neighbor, and he was a great listener, really empathetic, and he had a lot of time on his hands. And so they just started chatting innocently at first. And they started sharing, they started connecting, they started building a friendship. And then one thing led to another, and they started having feelings for each other. And then it led into a full-blown affair. So her relationship with her husband, because her needs weren't being met in that relationship, it increased her susceptibility, it increased her risk. And again, it was still her choice to have that affair, but the climate in her relationship increased her risk. So needs not being met in your marriage is a risk factor. Number 6 is traveling alone. So unfortunately, with a lot of jobs that are available today, they do require travel, and some require way more than others. But traveling alone is a classic affair risk. When you're alone and you're traveling, you feel anonymous. No one knows what I'm going to do here. No one knows me. I can do whatever I want. And when we feel anonymous, destructive behaviors tend to increase. That's why in the middle of riots, people are breaking into things, stealing things, because they feel anonymous. Everything's chaotic. There's no rules. And so this can happen if you travel alone. The more you travel alone, the higher your affair risk, because of that feeling of anonymity. I can do whatever I want and no one will ever know. There's no accountability. And so that's a risk factor. Number 7 is excessive time apart. And so if you've been in a relationship, or if you know of other couples, and COVID caused this for some couples. I knew one couple, and the woman was stuck in Asia and the husband was here, and they couldn't travel because all the flights were shut down. So during that time, COVID created this for a lot of couples. But this is a risk factor, because if you're not with your partner for an excessive amount of time, like let's say several months or even a month and beyond, that's a long time to not be with your partner. And if you're not with your partner and they're not with you, you're not going to be able to tend to one another's needs. And that's where it can increase the risk or the temptation to want to act out with somebody else. And again, it doesn't make it right. It doesn't justify it, but it does increase risk. Number 8 is substance abuse. So obviously, if you're under the influence of alcohol or drugs, your impulse control is going to go down, your filter is weakened, and then we tend to do things that we wouldn't do if we were under the influence of that substance. So substances and infidelity often go hand in hand, and that's the reason why. Number 9 is something you may or may not know about, but this is a common slippery slope, and it's sharing problems with others. So this starts innocently. Let's say you're at work and Barbara down the hall is just one of your colleagues, and you're hanging out and you're kind of working on a project, and you get along with her, and she's, really nice. You just kind of click, and before long, you start sharing some problems you have at home. And maybe it's a problem with your kid, or just a problem at work, any problems. And then you start talking about problems in your marriage. And Barbara's really a great listener. She's listening, she's responding and making you feel heard. And then she starts sharing her problems. She starts sharing problems she's having with her kids and problems she's feeling in her marriage. That is a recipe for an affair. And the reason for that is because when you start sharing your problems with someone else, it creates a soul tie. It creates an emotional bond, a connection. And you feel like, whoa, they know me and I know them. And that's a boundary right there that's just been violated. It's a path, a connection, a heart-to-heart connection that's just been opened. And when you start feeling emotionally close, the body tends to follow. And so that's a common trap a lot of people fall into, where it starts really innocent. They never saw an affair coming. They were just got along with someone, whether it's in a sports club or in the neighborhood or at work or wherever. They just were friends with someone, and one thing led to another, and they started sharing their problems. And that was the path. That was the path that created this soul tie, which led to romantic feelings developing. Number 10 is sharing activities with others. So this can also happen where you're not necessarily sharing problems, but you're doing an activity together. So maybe you play tennis and you need a partner to play doubles, and you're a female and you're looking for a partner, and you're like, oh, well, here's a friend in the neighborhood. Maybe he would like to play because my husband doesn't play. And so you ask him if he'd like to play doubles with you. And now there you are, you and this other man playing doubles tennis once a week together. That's a shared activity. I worked with a couple one time, and this is exactly what happened for this husband. He started meeting with his sister-in-law to play golf together so that their kids, who were cousins, could learn how to play golf. And so it just worked out with their schedules. And so they just started playing golf together, the four of them. And they did this for a while. And then because they were having that shared activity, it created this bond. And then romantic feelings started, and it led into a full-blown affair. So shared activities with someone of the opposite gender, or someone you might be attracted to, or someone who is attracted to you, that's high risk, because it creates a connection that can then lead to romantic feelings. So those are 10 things that can increase your affair risk. And again, you want to be mindful of these things and informed, so that you don't blindly walk into these types of dynamics and then be surprised when you find yourself in an affair. Okay, so now we're going to get into some of the meat and potatoes of today's masterclass, which is the 5 affair recovery mistakes. So what are they? What are the top recovery mistakes? You're probably here because either you or your partner has had an affair. And first of all, I just want to say my heart goes out to you, because going through an affair is one of the worst things you can experience. It's one of the most devastating, the most traumatic, the most hurtful. It's one of the worst things you can experience. And it's the number one thing that can crack open the foundation of a relationship worldwide, no matter what the color of your skin is, no matter what your orientation is, no matter what language you speak. Infidelity breaks apart trust like nothing else. So we're not trained on how do you respond to an affair. How do we do this right? if we are going to choose to try to work through this, which is a choice, if your partner has had an affair, there's nothing that says you have to stay. You can end the relationship. However, if you choose to want to stay, if you choose to want to work on the relationship and work through the affair, which is your choice, if you're the betrayed partner, then you want to be mindful of some affair recovery mistakes. So here's where I'm going to first talk about the mistakes wayward partners make. So the wayward partner is the partner who had the affair. So I'm going to go through 3 mistakes they tend to make, and then 2 mistakes the betrayed partners tend to make. So here's the first one: blaming your partner for the affair. This is very common. So you're the guilty party, you're the wayward partner, you've had the affair, and what do? You blame your partner. It's your fault that I had this affair. If you would have been more sexual, I wouldn't have had this affair. If you would have been more emotional with our emotional intimacy, I wouldn't have had this affair. If you would have prioritized our marriage, I wouldn't have had this affair. It's your fault. That's what they say a lot of times. And that's a mistake. And the reason that's a mistake, and this goes back to a point I was making earlier, is because no matter how unhappy you were, no matter how much your needs weren't being met, no matter how miserable you may have felt in your marriage, no one forced you to break your vows and have an affair. That was your choice, period. Now, like I said, the climate in your marriage, the climate in your relationship probably increased your risk to have an affair because your needs probably were not being met, and that increased your affair risk. And that's probably both of your fault on some level. However, at the end of the day, it was still your choice to move forward with an affair. No one forced you to do that. No one had a gun at your head saying, cheat. You chose to cheat. So this is a big mistake. You cannot blame your partner for the affair. And this is where people get caught up because they feel like, how can I be remorseful for the affair? Because it's actually your fault that I cheated. If you would have been meeting my needs, I wouldn't have cheated. That's screwed up thinking. The way to think is, no matter how unhappy I was, it was still my choice to cheat. And that choice is what I can be remorseful for. That choice is what I can take ownership for. That choice is what I'm responsible for. So that's a major mistake, is blaming your partner for the affair, because at the end of the day, it was a choice. Number 2, and this is a big one. If you're a wayward partner, thinking you can stay in contact with the affair person. This is a common mistake. So what this means is, let's say you've had an affair with Debbie at work, but you don't want to quit your job. So you keep working there with Debbie, and you try to convince yourself, and you try to convince your partner, it's okay. There's nothing between Debbie and I anymore. We're not going to continue that relationship. I don't see her that much at work. It's really infrequent. It's okay. I can still work with her, or I can still go to the same church with her, or I can still be neighbors with her or him, and I can still see him at the gym. It's okay. It's not okay. And here's the reason. Once you've had an affair with someone, it's a drug addiction. Research supports that what happens in your brain when you have an affair replicates the same activity as hard drugs, because it's highly stimulating. It's brand new. It's isolated from all life stress. It's in this little utopia when you have an affair. And because you've gone that direction with somebody, the likelihood of you having feelings again for them and rekindling the affair is always there. And so you are fooling yourself if you think you can stay in contact with the person you had an affair with. You cannot. Because if you do, it's just going to encourage those feelings to never die. Those feelings that you had for them, those romantic feelings, are going to still be there on some level. And all it takes is more time with them before the flame comes all the way back. And if you're the betrayed partner, you're not going to be able to heal. Because if your partner, if you know when they drive off in the morning for work, they're going to go be around that person they had the affair with, on some level, you're not going to be able to heal. You're going to be in a constant state of panic out of fear that the affair is going to continue. And so it prevents the betrayed partner from healing as well. And so this is a massive mistake, is thinking you can stay in contact with the affair person. You can't. And so that's where I encourage whoever is having the affair, you have to get that person 100% out of your life, whatever that takes. Zero more contact, zero contact, no exceptions, because of the things I highlighted. Number 3, for a wayward partner, getting irritated at your partner's triggers and their need to discuss the affair. This happens a lot. So let's say I cheated and then my partner wants to talk about the affair. I talk about it. Then they want to talk about it some more. I talk about it some more. Then they want to keep talking about it. And now I'm starting to get irritated. Why won't you just drop it? You keep bringing up the affair. How long are you just going to keep bringing it up? And you start getting irritated that they keep bringing it up and that they keep getting triggered and they keep wanting to talk about it and process through it. So worst thing you can do, if you're the one who's had the affair, for you to then get mad and aggravated and irritated at your partner for needing to talk about it. Because what's going on in your partner, it's a trauma response. Because everything that they thought they knew has been shaken. Their whole world has been turned upside down, and that creates trauma. And they had a complete loss of control and a loss of power in this affair experience, finding out about your affair. And so part of the trauma cycle is random things will create a trigger, and the person has to talk it through to cycle through the healing process. And that can happen for a long period of time. And so the moment you start getting mad at that and getting angry at them getting triggered and getting frustrated at how often they want to bring it up, that's the worst thing you can do, because it's invalidating the impact you had on them. And the more you shut it down, the more you tell them to stop talking about it, and you tell them you're not going to listen to them about it anymore, the more you're going to keep them stuck in their trauma. The best thing you can do is continually be patient and loving and open for them to talk about it as much as they need to, especially their triggers, because that's what's going to help them heal and eventually move through the trauma. So that's a third mistake you want to watch out for if you're the wayward partner. Okay, now we're going to get into mistakes for the betrayed partner. 2 common mistakes you want to watch out for if you're the one that's been betrayed. So this one, number 4 out of our 5 affair recovery mistakes, is if you're the betrayed partner, make sure that you are not working harder at saving the marriage than your wayward partner. And this happens a lot. You've been cheated on, and then you're the one begging your partner to come back. You're the one begging them to make the marriage work. You're the one scheduling the counseling appointments. You're the one sending them articles on how to heal from affairs. You're the one working way harder than they are. That's backwards. And do you know what that does? That gives them power. Because you're doing all this work, working up a sweat with smoke coming out of your ears, trying to save the marriage, trying to save everything. And that's giving them even more power, making them even less motivated, because you're chasing. Whenever someone feels chased, their motivation goes down. So you want to make sure your wayward partner is working harder than you. You want to make sure they're the ones coming to you saying, please give me a chance. They're the ones coming to you saying, please, let's see a counselor. They're the ones coming to you saying, please, let's read this book or go through this affair recovery program. They're the ones coming to you, begging you for a second chance. That's them working harder than you. And that's how it should be. If you're the betrayed partner, you need to be the one in power, not the other way around. And the way you stay in power is you work less hard than they are at saving the marriage. They're the ones that betrayed you. So why are you chasing them? Number 5, not ever dropping the affair, even if your partner has done all the right steps. So this can happen, and I've seen this happen with betrayed partners. So they're in a marriage, their partner had an affair, but their partner has done an excellent job at all the right steps to try to heal their mistake that they made. They've cut that person out of their life. They've opened up all accounts. They've shown sincere remorse, and they're really sensitive to the triggers, and they've done everything right. They're doing a really good job, but you're the betrayed partner and you refuse to drop the affair ever. And so it might be a year down the road or 2 years down the road or 5 or 10 years, and you keep throwing out the affair as a weapon and as an assault against their character every time you get mad. And you never drop the affair, even though they've done all the right things. And to clarify, that doesn't mean you drop your triggers, because triggers are involuntary. Triggers are, oh, I was watching a movie and it reminded me of the affair. Or I was listening to a song and it reminded me of the affair. That's a trigger, and those need to be processed through properly. But this is when the person won't drop the affair and they use it as a weapon every time there's a conflict. That's a mistake. And that's all. So thanks for attending, and I'll talk to you soon.